Can the market rally in crisis phase? Is there such a thing as an altcoin buy in a dead market? Yes, to both. We are going to go over 29 altcoins, Altcoin Overtime returns. We're going to use purely TA with a new hybrid model from a couple different methodologies combined into one to rank altcoins. Cut, hold, and add. We are also going to look at the idea of this AI financing crisis and ask, is it good for Bitcoin? Is it good for crypto? And we're going to mix in a lot of recent events and some news articles by some thought leaders to really answer the question. Because as everyone knows, Bitcoin in this 4-year cycle trade is missing the black swan, right? Richard Barry, who gave me some love on Twitter, and I appreciate it. And other commentators who gave me some love on Twitter, and I appreciate it. And other commentators are saying, you know, we need the black swan to end the decline. Now, I don't dispute that because the 4-year cycle guys have been right. And maybe it isn't necessarily a black swan, which is something that comes so far out of nowhere, no one ever could have thought it possible. It could be just a correction in equities or bond markets fall apart. Either one of those things could happen. And I don't think people are giving at least the bond market part enough weight in terms of seriousness. Now, at this point, people know that. And what you're going to stay tuned for on the stream is this thought process. What if the black swan was the October 10th Binance crash or Binance hack or whatever that resulted in this dramatic decline in crypto on like a flash crash basis, resulting in effectively the liquidation of broker dealers, an absence in liquidity, and as Raoul Paul said, delayed gratification in terms of like the futuristic version of crypto coming to reality? What if the black swan started the bear trade instead of ending it? A lot of people in 2022 were waiting for 10K in Bitcoin while it sat at 16K. What would happen if Bitcoin, still sitting just below the 2021 high, surprises everybody, right? Instead of, bottoming in October, it bottoms now. Now, Arthur Hayes has a really good line on this. We're going to go over it. I kind of liked it. It was catchy. We're going to go over some Bitcoin TA, and we're also going to discuss some of the new research that just hit platinum and some of the calls that Toby has made that are now becoming mainstream. So Patreon also has a free report. So this Altcoin Overtime report is in Patreon for members who join, including the free group. We are giving the free group some content, and we would encourage you that the bull market is coming, as Richard Barry said. So maybe it's time to get some research. Also, in the YouTube member area, you can support the channel for $4.95 and get access to our cool emojis. I have seen drafts of Lego Bill, Lego Toby, and the Lizard. For what that's worth, for friends out there, you can support the channel with a $5 membership. It's like a $5 super chat once a month, and get our YouTube member podcast for an upgrade to a higher tier where you get Toby and me doing small cap picks and thought leadership, which is now being copied virtually everywhere. Mike Novogratz and Galaxy Digital wrote a piece about the code economy, and this whole idea of the rails of the future is everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Excuse me, everywhere. And Toby's been talking about it for over a year. over a year. And then eventually people will get to the coins that we have picked. We're going to go over some of the big cap coins today. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. The big cap coins today in Altcoin Overtime. Cut, hold, add. Where does your coin fall on the list? So don't go anywhere for that. Also, PowerPoint, is this a bullish crisis? Don't miss it. Okay, here's Richard Barry giving us some love. Richard Barry, an up-and-coming analyst. You know, he reads Sam Price and my work. Sam Price is a great pure TA guy, probably the best, to be honest. And Richard thinks that you can have fall volatility, which is true. You can have fall volatility. And this year could be the year that everybody wakes up and goes, hey, what about cryptocurrency and digital assets? Because right now, as you're going to see on some of these charts that are broken, you're going to see how people have just packed it in and given up to the point where the chart really is broken. Now, do you want to buy the cuts and sell the ads? My father used to say, buy the D's, as in A through F, buy the D's and sell the A's. I'm going to leave that up to you, but we're going to be ranking Altcoin Overtime in terms of TA. So make sure you check that out. Now, let's go to the Strait of Hormuz. Let's talk about something that Scott Bessent recently said so we can really handle this idea of oil risk. Now, of course, everyone's running out of oil. We all know this. We also know that Uncle Sugar is kind of sitting on the oil futures contract. But there's a different angle. There's a different angle which probably accounts for why oil is not at $200. So Bessent said the Strait is never going back to the way it was. Okay. The other side has tried to use it as a choke point. What we are going to see over the next 2 years is that just choke point has become less relevant, just another body of water, and there are going to be pipelines and other things around it or instead of it. Now, interesting that that was ridiculed as administration Kool-Aid. Could be. Or you could say the market doesn't react to coercion very well. Markets as in broader marketplace terms. Doesn't react well to coercion. And this group, by, putting the Strait under threat, is digging their own grave long term. In other words, if it's under threat, everybody's got to go, well, we got to get capital moving towards other solutions. So on one hand, the current sovereign in power here appears to have no option. Maybe they don't have good options short term, but long term, very interesting because, if that waterway is closed, the big loser is China, not us. So not exactly traditional geopolitics, but the longer they use their seemingly unstoppable leverage, the more they're marginalizing themselves long term. So this would argue against $200 oil. Now, do you buy that? I don't know. Bessent is a hedge fund guy, and he knows how capital will flow. Right? But again, that's long term. In the short term, there's always risk over there, obviously. But this is the first time I've seen something that said, they don't have unstoppable leverage, which, could be a relief trade for Bitcoin. Could be, right? Because, Kevin Warsh is changing how the Fed works. No one wants to talk about this, but it's true. Everybody is whining because the press conferences are a disaster. He should be raising rates. You know, inflation is a big deal. Guess what? If you look at what the Fed used to be a long time ago, when I was your age, the Fed didn't tell you anything. They told you absolutely nothing, in fact. They would raise and lower rates through actions on repo desks, which is complicated. So if the Fed was supposed to add liquidity and they drained it, they raised rates. And if they were supposed to drain it and they added it, they lowered rates. There was no press conference. The FOMC minutes were a joke. They were 2 months behind, or a month, an extended period of time past what everybody already knew. Press conferences? Are you kidding me? You'd hear from the Fed like twice a year. You'd have Greenspan or a Fed chairman testifying in front of Congress, and that's about what you'd hear. That's about it. Now, if the Fed had to get on the tape and say something, that was an earth-shattering event, right? Like money supply is out of control. Volcker said that. Greenspan talked about irrational exuberance in the stock market. That was 1997, right before it went parabolic for 3 years. Poor guy. Okay. You never heard from these guys. And the market has gotten spoiled. The market is used to the Fed saying, oh, don't worry. This is exactly what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. And then parentheses, don't worry. We won't let stocks blow up. We won't let bonds blow up. Everything will be fine because Uncle Sugar is here. Even when Powell was tightening, right? They knew what he was going to do. Even though that was, crazy, the extent to which he had to raise rates because he was so behind the curve. But the Fed didn't used to tell you anything. And he's going back to that. And the market doesn't like it. The bond market doesn't like it. Stocks freaked out. But hold on a second. If the guy's not a tightening machine, he's taking the Fed back to what it used to be. Does that remove a scary overhang from Bitcoin? In other words, if this guy's not going to come out and drop the hammer for no reason, or we don't know what he's going to do, does that leave the free market to be free? What a novel concept. So equities have to figure it out. Long bonds have to figure it out. And Bitcoin can figure it out. Now, can there be something happen to stocks? Can this AI trade nuke? I think at this point, we all know what the negative catalysts are. We've all seen the TA for 50. We've all seen the targets for 40. We've seen this. But what if this change in the Fed is freedom for free markets? And if the Fed isn't going to control any market too much, then stocks and bonds have to adjust. But Bitcoin's like, hey, this is how it normally is for us. Maybe we can be free. Maybe it's not somebody sitting on us the way it used to be. Now, on this AI bubble, I have one quote for you. It's in the deck, but we'll go over it. It's from a Financial Times article from my friend Andy, trying to get this on TikTok. I'm just going to read this. We need to find our way back to reality. In a certain person's description, that which you stop believing in it, that which when you stop believing in it doesn't go away. Now, what they may stop believing in is the invincibility of the AI trade. So the AI trade may split between the reality that propels stocks, that they're building and building and building and building, to this reality about how they financed it and how dangerous that all is. And frankly, how bad it all is. And that's where this idea of a bullish crisis comes in. In other words, is liquidity going to get here sooner rather than later? You'll never know. You'll never know. I mean, clearly when stocks spiked, you know, even though the Fed wants to sort of like change how they do things, that does feel like the plunge protection team. It does. But what happens if there's an AI debt issue? We'll go over that. That's in the PowerPoint. That's Arthur Hayes. And then you have one other item, which I really like for any Muppet Show fans, that recently somebody used fake ID to call major Wall Street financial firms like Citadel. And somehow the mimicking of the voice ID, or whatever it was, got them access. And this goes back to a Toby theme, which again, we have coins on this. Not here today. In the YouTube member area, we have coins, right? Toby is talking about identity. So there's Rails, which everyone's talking about. And the next thing everyone's going to be talking about is privacy and identity, about how these privacy coins can start moving. And we're going to be looking at the big ones today. Of course, you know, in the YouTube member area, that's where we look at the small up and coming stuff, because when this bear market ends, this small cap stuff is all going to 10x right away, because that's where the new hot trades are that machines are going to do. Now, let's go to the PowerPoint about, you know, the bullish crisis, which does have TA in it. And then we will get to Altcoin Overtime, where we have our TA-based rankings. Okay. So this is PowerPoint driven. I'll do the best I can to explain it to our friends on TikTok. The crisis has already begun, and it's probably in the bond market. So you have a bullish tape in equities and even a little bit bullish tape in crypto for bearish reasons, right? The market can rally because the system is creating more liquidity to postpone recognizing the problem, which is this AI debt problem, or AI hyperscaler debt problem, or hyperscaler bond market problem, along with the, you know, colossal government bond market problems. Right? The only answer to more debt, the only answer to too much debt is more debt, more liquidity. Bitcoin may be smelling the liquidity response to the crisis now. In other words, if AI is a mess, the AI debt is a mess, the treasury debt's a mess, and God help us all, after a failed auction, or nearly failed auction, excuse me, in Japan, in their 10-year bond, that bond market is in serious trouble. Not waiting for the bailout, front-running the conditions that make one necessary. So is that why Bitcoin is holding up? Frankly, that's the only reason why Bitcoin wouldn't go lower, because it smells the liquidity response. We will discuss gold and silver, or we did discuss gold and silver, which has done well lately, in our Patreon reports, including gold and silver TA with levels. So the choke point law, capital routes around any control point that becomes too risky. Control points become fragility points. If the world depends on one date, capital moves. Energy gave us the template, right? The market spends money building somewhere else. Now, this is crude oil. Again, we go over this in our TA report in Patreon, but, you know, this is making lower highs, and it should be at 200. That's all I can tell you. It should be at 200 based on the manipulation and the supply problems that are out there. It's not. We'll see if that holds. Clearly, this is a very important variable. And even though, as somebody said, you know, Besant could be a stooge from the Soros hedge fund world and a Muppet, he does have a point about the longer they use that leverage, the more they hurt themselves long term. Now, as we discovered earlier, human voice is not proof of who you are. AI didn't just create better scams. It changed the cost curve of deception. In other words, this isn't funny anymore. If they can get through voice ID or they could break in any other way, who knows who anybody is or who knows who owns what without blockchain verification and, frankly, ZK sync to keep it private. When identity gets cheap to fake, verification gets bid. That's crypto. Forward guidance with the Fed, the market got addicted to it. Now long bonds have to reprice itself. Stocks can rise, Bitcoin can rise, but bonds can still be a warning underneath. In other words, obviously, if the bond market breaks down and there's some sort of catastrophe and, you know, that becomes the black swan event, well, okay, you just watch 20 minutes of TV for no reason. However, if the bond market teetering is in itself a warning of a much bigger problem later, they can smell the liquidity response. Now, in fact, the liquidity may be coming because I don't know how they can let that whole thing become a disaster. How can you let the Japanese bond market, the US bond market, and the market for AI hyperscalers to blow up the corporate bond market? In other words, if Bitcoin continues to rally, you have your answer. I'm giving it to you like I'm reverse engineering. If Bitcoin went up, this would be why. So you want to own assets outside promises. Own anything that bypasses the existing infrastructure. I'm not just talking about oil. Like, this is relevant to money, finance, you know, monetary policy, currency integrity. Don't overpay for choke point rent. A credit problem can create a rally before it creates the crash. The first response to too much credit is more credit. AI is a credit cycle wearing a technology costume. In other words, everyone is telling you that, oh my God, it's a bubble like 2000. Really what it is a potential debt problem like the railroads in 1873. That's the real threat. It's not, does AI work? It's who financed the build out. Real assets get built. Railroads were real. Housing was real. AI can be real and still overfinanced. All those bonds are not going to return capital to shareholders, period. It could be Oracle. It could be all these places that have major problems. Now, if you look at bubbles, bubble timing in plain English, you have acceleration, just the way Bitcoin accelerated to 120. You have this no man's land, which was that range trade it was in. And then you have when the sort of activity around the bubble decelerates. And then you have an event. Okay. Right now, everything, at least AI related, is in no man's land. Still huge, still strategic, still bullish. You saw what they did in these stocks, even though that's crazy. And who knows if that's going to last. But, you know, they still love it. They still love it. And AI debt could be too big to fail. And it's a permission slip for them to continue borrow money because it's too big to fail. I mean, that's Arthur Hayes, and that in itself is mind-boggling. That explains the ongoing bid in Bitcoin, even with all this stock market volatility. Strategic industries get protected first and disciplined last. More credit now, currency pain later. That is the bullish crisis trade. Bonds will tell you eventually what the rescue cost is. So eventually you're going to have a bond market problem, or eventually you're going to have to answer to the bond market. Maybe not today. Or maybe they know this and Besant has to come in and save everything because he just can't let it get out of control off the election and why this geopolitical situation continues to go on. And back to that Financial Times article, sovereigns are all wound up with traditional geopolitics when they should be aware of what the billionaire class is doing, how they can change identity, thought crime, science fiction, and all that stuff coming true right under their noses. Watching private sector AI build a monster while everybody is talking about the price of oil. As a matter of fact, as I think of it, that's a classic Toby thing. Except Toby doesn't believe, there's anything, she believes in the benefits of AI rather than the threat. Now, I'll meet you in the middle. If there's an issue and threat from AI, it's the disruptions of all the business models that are currently doing very well with great earnings and things like the S&P and NASDAQ. In other words, if there's a black swan out there, it's because AI does something that's so radical that it just shakes everything and everybody to the core, and nobody knows what anything is worth, which, I can see that hurting Bitcoin. Again, we've assembled our levels and we've assembled our strategic outlook in our Patreon group to make sure, honestly, that our members have the best research possible. Because when this bear market ends, there is going to be epic opportunity. I think everyone gets that. Just that I don't think until, say, Novogratz and Arthur Hayes came out with their thought leadership pieces that it became top of mind. In other words, Arthur Hayes talking about stealth liquidity, like liquidity coming from a place you can't see. Basically, in other words, it's not the Fed going, okay, everybody, we're doing QE, gong. It's not going to be like that. It's not. You're going to have to follow the market to see, okay, what is the Fed actually doing? That's interesting, I think. And then, of course, Novogratz is on calling it the code economy, which is really all you need to know. If it's a code economy, how do you invest in a code economy? Okay, well, you can buy the Magnificent Seven or you can buy hyperscaler debt. Why? I don't know. It's like, what's the upside from here in that? I don't know. I don't know, but it doesn't sound particularly exciting to me. It doesn't, right? I think if you go to some macro TA, we're keeping this vague on purpose because Patreon got the deluxe version, but this does look like a serious dollar top. And if it is, because we have our breakdown levels, obviously that would be constructive at multiple levels. It's not clear in S&P whether or not this is a blow off top or a massive acceleration after a range. We go over that. And the Japanese are another wild card. It's another wild card. Okay. We changed the Bitcoin framing because the tape has changed. We think the chart has stopped supporting a liquidation first mentality. In other words, I ran this by Toby. I said, there's a solar eclipse coming up. There's a big volatility window coming up. Doesn't say which direction. It just says, trends can reverse or you can have extreme volatility. I ran this scenario of Bitcoin sharply lower first and then coming back. She didn't like it. She didn't like the timing. She just didn't like it. So I'm like, all right, let's try something else. Let's mix Lux Algo, which is the trend lines and this oscillator down here with Alpha Intelligence, which, tracks highs on multiple time frames plus bottoming signals similar to DeMark. Shocking conclusion on Bitcoin futures. I would never have known. The tell is bad news arriving and Bitcoin refusing to fall. So if there is a hyperscaler debt problem and Bitcoin starts to trade like money, not leverage technology, not a NASDAQ proxy. In other words, if Bitcoin actually starts trading like a currency alternative, like gold and silver, like if you look at this silver chart, I mean, we discussed the levels in Patreon, okay? But what does this look like to you? This has done a 50% retracement of the huge spike up. It's been a massive, grinding, annoying range, grinding everybody out, okay? Gold is something similar. Now, poor XRP, the counter example. We'll go over XRP, and my honest conclusion about XRP is how in God's name could Ripple have ever allowed XRP to look the way it does, to not provide any catalyst for XRP? It's unthinkable. It is. I mean, especially since everybody was looking for much higher XRP back in the day when it was going to be in the US cryptocurrency strategic reserve. Remember that? Yeah, I do, unfortunately. Privacy, identity, Zcash. Wow, do we have a Zcash conclusion or a Zcash level in Patreon? Monero doesn't look like Zcash, but it's getting perky. We've been waiting for this privacy trade all year. And even privacy, I don't know, it's not junk bonds, but junk coins may actually start to get a bid. You know, we think Dash is interesting. It's either that or somebody was bringing up this Bitcoin fork, right? Which, you know, everyone is seemingly against. You know, I think that comes and goes. Hopefully that's not the Bitcoin black swan that somebody doesn't really understand. Now, a major GAN researcher has looked at this eclipse, and her conclusion, Olga, her conclusion is that this eclipse harkens back to like the 1600s. A 343-year echo is what she called it, where there was a struggle over control, sovereignty, like who actually ran things. And I love this because, you know, the eclipse can shake things up, obviously. And who is in control? Do they have control over hyperscaler debt? Do they have control over the bond markets? I mean, they can always add liquidity, and they're going to. They have to. But who drives the world? And why are gold and silver up? Well, okay, here's why. This is the fear trade. Who is in control? You know, everyone assumes the Fed's going to do a press conference and save the day. Okay, well, you're not getting a press conference. And if you do, he's not going to come out and say, we're going to save the day. He's not going to come out and say anything. Does this not open a gate for Bitcoin? Yes. Okay. Everything gets wasted. Bitcoin is done. That's the market update. Have a good weekend. And again, we know the negative TA stuff is out there. We'll go over some more Bitcoin TA, a big trend line in a minute. But the struggle for control can end up being beneficial to Bitcoin and crypto, because crypto is not dead, but as you're going to see in some of these like cut charts, it's being absolutely ignored to the point where it has broken charts. In other words, broken charts don't mean, oh God, it's broken, it's done, whatever. I mean, it can, or it could mean they've left it by the side of the road to such a degree that it's got nowhere to go but up. Like, I mean, I don't know. Where's support is at 0, right? I mean, now, of course, we have to talk about risks to the view. Obviously a Bitcoin breakdown or even a Bitcoin's failure to follow gold and silver. Bitcoin should actually be leading that trade. It's not as of now. Stocks and bonds crack and, the dollar and oil go up. The market may be buying the policy response before the politicians admit one is coming. This is like, this is your screenshot for the thesis. The market may be buying the policy response before the politicians admit one is coming. That is the bullish crisis. That's like part of the Arthur Hayes theme, which, I adopted, mixed with Novogratz, threw in a sprinkle of Toby and thought leadership. And the next thing you know, you have an explanation as to why Bitcoin is bid. And if everything cracks, we know what happens. We know what happens. But, I think there's a lot of people sitting around thinking, oh, well, this is dead and there's no point looking at it. As Monero goes up 5% as of me talking right now with, Zcash looking perky. This whole thing, I mean, if you can call a firm like Citadel and use the telephone to get involved or to kind of, break into these places, this cybersecurity threat, the cybersecurity threat is called the unhedged variable. Interesting. In an article from FinTech.io from, my friend Andy helped me see. This risk of AI rearranging everything has not been traded at all. And as of course, I will do my boomer reminder that Bitcoin is the only scarce asset, verifiable on chain. Everyone's talking about this fork, which, I get it. That's an event. Michael Saylor hates it. And I think that's kind of all you need to know, especially since, he's like the MIT rocket scientist on how Bitcoin works. May not be a finance genius, or he may be. But be that as it may, everyone's talking about the fork. No one's talking about the unhedged variable, how Bitcoin is scarce, and how there's going to be absolutely no way to prove anybody or anything without an on-chain address or a QR code. There's just no way. Like, who are you? What? A piece of plastic? A picture? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? Why do you think guys like Novogratz and Galaxy Digital are writing about the rails? You know why? Because their big customers are talking about the code economy. These research departments, they were treading water for a while. Like, here's an on-chain metric, and here's another on-chain metric, and we're close to a bottom, but we're not there yet. And they did all this because they had to do it, because they had to publish content. Believe me, I know. But now they're going towards this idea of rails, which we've been on for a very long time. And that's because I bet their customers are on it. And they want to know, how can we get involved? What are the coins? What are the plays? Solana was perky. YouTube is talking about the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act comes and goes. We'll do it later. All the congressmen have to get what they want to vote for it, whatever. It's going to get done because Wall Street wants it to get done. But suddenly, that's not the issue. So Arthur Hayes says the issue is invisible. You're not going to hear about it from the Fed, and crypto YouTube is distracted with the Clarity Act. No one's paying attention here. No one. And, if certain TA indicators, if our little TA system winds up being even remotely correct, and Bitcoin doesn't crack and continues this grind higher, maybe there's a bullish surprise out there, or maybe there's a crypto awakening, and everybody's looking for a bottom in October. when maybe October has a different outcome, a retest, a higher low. What happens? Well, obviously, you want to turn to Patreon Platinum and find out. But the sheer fact I'm raising this question, I don't know. In my opinion, it's kind of helpful. In other words, isn't it time for altcoin overtime? It certainly is. Okay. 29 coins ranked based on a TA system. So nobody lose their mind. Just looking at the chart and just saying, okay, what looks okay and what doesn't based on a whole combination of metrics. Does your coin make the cut? So add means the structure is working and the trend is intact. You can add into strength. Hold means nothing broken, nothing confirmed, no urgency, wait. On the brink. Still alive, but there's a deadline. It needs to get its act together on the chart. And cut means structure already broke. Holding is hope, not analysis. Now, what's the first thing we'll do? We'll do Bitcoin. The trend line everyone is watching. Okay. There's the big trend line in Bitcoin. Here it is. Can bring it up on LuxAlgo. We got all this fancy stuff, and it may just come down to this, right? Here's a big trend line drawn off the top. Frequently, all good trend lines have 3 points. This could be the third point. Obviously, it would be grotesquely ugly if there was a false breakout. If it goes above the trend line and comes back down, that would be awful. Also makes for a very short stream. But Bitcoin's got to get above 66.7. We've discussed this. Below 62.3, 57 comes into play. Bitcoin doesn't look too bad. Bitcoin looks better than you think. And who knows? We don't know how this trend line gets resolved. Frankly, I suspect by the end of this week, the whole world is going to be looking at it, if they aren't already, honestly. Okay. 6 structures that broke, and one of them is a top 10 name. Oh, no. Oh, no. Not XRP. How could Ripple have let this happen? $10 billion in supply overhead. Every rally gets sold by bag holders, and this triangle here got resolved downward. At its discount zone, it's just, I have a very simple question. Where is the XRP catalyst? Where is it? And whose job is it to provide it? It's Ripple's job to provide it. Exactly. Grandpa Kato's like, oh, that is exactly what I said. I was like, I do not want to talk about this. Right? The sad and true fact of the matter is XRP has been abandoned by Ripple and now has a chart that needs to be fixed. That's how I would put it. Okay. KAITO, InfoFi, a massive number of sell signals from Alpha Intelligence, a blow off top, and then a collapse. Okay. There was nothing underneath this up move. Nothing. So chart program, chart model wants out. And another sad, abandoned chart is Hedera. Now, honestly, when the model calculated this, I saw it kind of hesitate on Hedera. Could have gone either way. You got a lot of Alpha Intelligence buy signals on the way down here. So I'm actually surprised the model went in this direction. But this is an example of a good coin, an American-made crypto that got left on the side of the road. Now, again, this could mean the worst charts are the screaming buys. And I don't mind that. I don't. But I think it's important for Altcoin Overtime to say, you know what? The chart kind of broke. right? The strength of the downtrend is such that our bag holder is going to sell every rally. And I think it's important to notice. And another shocking surprise on the broken list is virtuals, right? Like every time frame looks no good, no bid anywhere in the structure, and there's a bullish pattern that's not drawing buyers. You know, it's like a flagship AI agent name, while newer agent infrastructure is at the top of our list. I mean, I want you to stay tuned for the good stuff, but this is a reflection of the pain in the bear market. Like, how much pain is there when these charts appear broken? Maybe the projects aren't broken, but people gave on it to such a degree that the charts broke. I think, you know, it's something sobering to think about. Fetch, artificial super intelligence token with an 80% strength on the downtrend, right? I mean, a textbook run of lower highs. These charts, these projects, they're owned. Some people love them. We like them. And the strength of the downtrend in these stocks is shocking. Like, you can look at a crypto chart and go, yeah, okay, it's down. Yeah, it's at the discount zone. You go chart after chart after chart, and you go, God, is this ever going to come back? I'm not saying they're never going to come back, but you're running on hope on all these trades. CANTON, God, can you believe this? The real world asset play. I ran with this because this model was just shocking. I mean, this was a consensus long throughout the entire bull market, along with Hyperliquid, right? Hyperliquid, by the way, is in Patreon. You know, this broke down, and now this thing is saying that it's broken. It outperformed, and then boom. Of all the ones, I don't know if I believe this. I don't. But it is what it is. Now, with that shock out of the way, you can, you know, I don't know. you can put the Pepto-Bismol down and wipe the pink stuff off your beard and move on to something a little bit more positive, that there are charts that are not broken, right? 7 coins doing nothing at all, which means they're okay. Layer 0, Chainlink, Monad. So interoperability, Oracle's layer 1. Backpack and Exchange, Near, Arrow, Ondo. Again, coins that are owned, coins that have obvious value propositions, right? Near was an Arthur Hayes play. You know, a lot of really extreme volatility on these charts, but they're not broken. It doesn't mean it's broken. It doesn't mean it's great. It's just nothing is confirmed. Nothing. We're waiting for the market to do something before we say anything. But it's not like, okay, well, we got to get out, or the chart looks so disastrous that it can't come back. Okay. Compression is really what it is. Those coins are compressed. You know, a coiled spring is not a promise, but a compression says the move is coming. It just says nothing about the direction. Okay. Near probably looks the best of all. On the brink. So we have an on the brink category. 3 coins that can still make it. 3 coins that can still make it, even though they look like they're about to break. Okay. The first one is Sui. So, you know, Sui and Hedera were close. Sui got the nod in terms of, you know, broken charts. there are still some positive readings, and there is this falling wedge on Lux Algo, which frequently can be resolved bullish if you get the rally. So I'm sure Raoul Paul will be happy to know that SUI is at least on the brink. Okay, some levels in SUI, 70 or 71 cents, wonderful. 65 cents could be the end. Think about that. Think about if like Bitcoin falls apart and goes to 57, that you could have the end of some of these coins. This is just according to TA. Okay. SUI's got 3 weeks to get its act together. Okay. ATH, DePIN, and GPU compute. You have a double bottom. It's like, this is one of the coins that was in like Toby's universe. Okay. It's the only GPU compute name in the set. Will they need decentralized computing power? You have a confirmation above 43.17 and a dead window, 2 weeks to get its act together. And Zen, which is a privacy coin on Coinbase, falling wedge, potentially bullish. Zcash and Monero both seem to be doing well. A couple of alpha intelligence buy zones, buy signals down here at the lows. Frankly, I'm surprised this wound up on the brink. This actually looked decent to me, but we're going off our system. Okay. Now, 7 coins where the structure seems to be working. Number 7, Monero, the original. Every transaction private by default. Okay, Monero breaking out of a trend line, breaking out of a triangle, and moving higher. Okay, it's not just one spike. It's been kind of making this higher lows pattern. Okay, weekly and daily still show, this is weak overall after this big collapse. Tau. Shocking that Tau wound up on the add list and ASI or Fetch wound up on the not so good list. Decentralized Machine Learning Network, DNT Saver, welcome. Okay. Bullish downward sloping triangle. Daily chart flipped up. Weekly still looks terrible like everything else. You don't want to see it below 182. This looks okay. This looks like something that's trying to get off the mat. I agree with this. AAVE, deposit collateral, borrow against it. Rate set by supply and demand. Imagine that. Supply and demand. This thing doubled off the lows. It's holding. These rising wedge patterns are not always good. These sell signals from alpha intelligence are not great. Yet the system was like, it's okay. I would have said no, but the model says yes. That's why we have a model. Keeps my bias out of it. Number 4 is MORPHO, lending protocol on Ethereum and Base. Matches lenders and borrowers directly. More free market stuff. Imagine that. Okay. You had the sell signal and then it came down. And now we're trying to figure out whether or not it's breaking out of the bottom of this triangle or whether this whole thing is just a giant like shoulder, head, shoulder. It's kind of a very crypto lifer way to look at it. And this whole thing is the head and shoulders bottom at the top of a range. Boom. Yeah, we'll see. But it's got a number 4 ranking for DeFi lending. So notice what's working here. Notice privacy is working. DeFi lending is working. Zcash, number 3. Privacy built on zero knowledge proofs. Privacy is optional. And you know what? After this thing with Citadel, maybe people are going to get over the fact that it's optional and figure out how to click the button. Very interesting thesis on this in Patreon. I would pay attention to Zcash and Monero. I know that's not exactly a hot take, but there is a hot take in Zcash. There is. Okay. You know, this formation, right? This rising wedge, it could be an accumulation cone. I don't know. Okay. You know, but the weekly read in Zcash is better than Monero's weekly read. Now, number 2, more shocking stuff. TALIS network, on-chain AI agents built on SUI. Agents own assets and act on their own. The rules are in smart contracts backed by the SUI Foundation. So you think the AI trade's not being done, huh? This was a Toby coin. And it looks like even with the alpha intelligence topping signals, they're still buying the dip. There are some wicks here. It's interesting. Right now, again, this is technical analysis, measuring trend strength. You know, if there was ever something that was like, you know, buy the ones that are dead and sell the ones that are great, I don't know. Maybe this has had its move. Maybe. But you can see them buying the dip relentlessly. And again, where are they? If they're not doing this agent trade in virtuals, where are they doing it? Ticker symbol is US. Worth having on a watch list. And the number 1 ad coin, which is shocking, is a decentralized AI network built on Cosmos ALLORA network. What? That's why this was shocking. This is why, you know, by the way, the Word document that goes with this, it doesn't have the charts, but the Word document that goes with this is in Patreon for all members. So if you're a member, if you're a free member, there's 800 people there. And then, you know, for the paid members, it's there as well. The Word doc, so you can get a little bit more color versus just the chart picture. So, you know, really interesting that ALLORA goes through this euphoric top, gave back half the June move, young token, short history, big early investor unlocks ahead. Okay. But look at what they want to buy. Look at what they want to buy. Right. You know, obviously these charts can change at any time. We know that. This is not investment advice. And you should not cry if your coin is on the naughty list. Your coin is on the naughty list because it lost sponsorship. It lost sponsorship. In other words, the people who should be buying it are not buying it, and everyone who's left is a bag holder who's selling. And you can't believe how much XRP is dead stuff is running around Instagram. I mean, it's just like first XRP was going to $5 and now it's dead. No, XRP has a broken chart because there's no catalyst. Now, if you want some hope, if you'd like a cup of Kool-Aid on the way out, the only way these things revive themselves, or at least the ones that have problems, is if machines come in and start using them. And how far away can that be when Novogratz publishes the code economy? Right? I mean, you know, Novogratz is being criticized for all kinds of things related to Galaxy Digital because it's a crypto company, it's an AI company. The code economy needs programmable rails and it needs the power to run them. Code needs a place to live, and Galaxy was built for that convergence. Boy, was that written by Toby? I think it was. I think it was. And it's amazing how agent-related trades are leading, especially if you go beyond Bitcoin. Like the TA system wants to buy the dip in one and is okay with Momo trading on the other. You know, how weird is that? And again, this is just going off Alpha Intelligence and Lux Algo, looking at things like trend strength and whatnot. The stuff that gets cut needs a catalyst. The stuff that's ranging is a hold. It doesn't mean it's dead. And I think that's very important for crypto people. Just because it's not moving, at least for those coins like Near, it doesn't mean it's dead. And I also think you have to take a look at privacy, because if this Bitcoin fork or Bitcoin can't start moving, Monero and Zcash can start moving. Because if you can break into Citadel with a phone call, the monster is out there. Everybody thinks the problem is oil. The problem isn't oil. It's what these, trillion-dollar entities are creating. And they're going to get loose. They're going to get loose doing positive things in crypto, and they're going to get loose doing negative things that are going to require things in crypto, including scarcity, identity, rails, and all the stuff that we have been talking about and picking the small coins, which we do over and over again, right? Our next stream is coming up in the next 3 days, a podcast you don't want to miss. Toby wasn't wrong. She was just early on purpose, so our people would be ready to go. This wouldn't be like, what's a rail? What's identity? No, they know. And they know to jump on these coins. Like when these coins start moving, our people are going to be in the know on this. There isn't going to be getting their head around anything. They got their heads around it. And now it's going to be time to just launch. The only issue is, can Bitcoin break the trend line? Are we headed for some one final thing like everyone thinks? Or, are we done with that? Because as Arthur Hayes said, they're front running the eventual liquidity. They can't not put liquidity in. So let's just start rallying now and wait for the day when they do. In other words, the black swan is known. We know what the black swan is, and we know they're going to have to address it eventually. Warsh kind of let it all go on its own. Now the question is, can they just let it go? And if not, what are they going to do about it? This is Hayes' theme, right? AI is too big to fail. Interesting, right? The free market kind of got loose, kind of got wild, and it's not a problem in the stocks. It's in a problem in what they call the credit markets. And the credit markets are screaming, oh my God. I have one story about that from 2008, where our lending departments at Goldman, the interbank lending departments that were their simple job, nothing was simple, but their job was to manage overnight lending between banks or lending between banks in general. And when they called up and said, no one's lending, this whole thing over here is shut down, and I'm going home to put my money under my mattress, you better get out of everything in stocks. Our finance trader, right, who I loved, she was fantastic. She just shorted everything. And then 3 days later, it all collapsed, just a huge collapse. The credit markets know things way before the stock market does. They say that bond traders and credit traders are the adults in the room. So if there's a problem out there, liquidity is coming. Again, you got quite the bid in gold and silver. Quite the bid. More in Patreon. TA you want to get, and our TA model's hot. And we got the low in NASDAQ on the way down. I mean, I thought that thing was nuclear and was going to zero, but I'm like, just leave the report there in Patreon. Just stay with the model. Stay with what it says. Because, everybody has a bias, and that's why, I talk on TV every day. So I have my Kramer moments, which is why I think presenting this model and giving it to people so you can say, okay, I'm in the free Patreon group. Maybe it's time to come home. Come home. Bull Runner is here. Zepedas, thank you for your work. God, I love when he says that. It makes my day when I see the guys, jumping on the stream, 5 minutes after I post a tweet. That actually means a lot. Thomas Chai, Warpaint, 5-wave invalid. Near and Hyperliquid. We covered Near. Bill, don't you get tired of talking about black swans? It's been 2 years of this. I'm tired. Yeah, dude, I'm not talking about black swans. I think the black swan was, and I didn't even think of this until I started doing my research. The black swan was the Binance trade. Who thought that was coming? Who thought Binance was going to break when Bitcoin was at 100 and something? Who was looking for that? Nobody. And that was catastrophic in a way. I mean, you had stuff wick down like 80%. People lost their minds. Market making firms went out of business. Disaster corn on the cob has not worked. You know, everyone was freaking out about oil. Everyone was freaking out about tech. Everyone freaked out about AI stocks. Everyone freaked out. And it's all been wrong. And Toby said that. So we don't have to talk about the black swans. We just have to talk about the liquidity that's coming so there isn't one. What, you think Scott Bessent, an ex-Soros guy, is just going to sit around and watch everything melt down in his face? I don't know. You got to seriously think about that. You know, they can push the liquidity button at the Fed and the Treasury. You know, and if I'm wrong, they could take Bitcoin to 57. But if I'm right, you could have one of the biggest surprise rallies in the history of crypto because no one's looking for it. It's August. No one cares. Europe's on vacation, blah, 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 blah. Live it 351 is here. Crypto crazy. Good afternoon. Okay. Yeah. Strategic petroleum reserve around the world needs to be replenished. Yeah, dude. They need to figure this oil thing out. No question about it. You know, you have oil go where oil could go. But again, as the other person noted, how tired of talking about this are you? Tired of talking about it. Grandpa Keeter. Lizards unite against the retail crypto bro. So true, man. You know, they don't care about you. They don't. They absolutely don't. These guys that are building all this stuff, but you got to use it for your benefit, which is what I'm trying to do, you know, which, you know, drives our research effort. Our research effort is equivalent to an entire company that I used to work at. And we're doing it with 2 people. Okay. Mike Volmer, thank you for volunteering. Cyberpunch is here. Welcome. Where do you see gold headed? Much higher. Much higher. You know, potentially. What is your favorite film? Well, historically, my favorite film is Tears of the Sun, a little-known Bruce Willis movie about a group of soldiers that don't follow orders to do the right thing. You know, it's got some of the best, like, movie-related fighting in terms of possible realism, and, you know, the heroes don't all walk away unscathed. And there's a final scene where, you know, they dispense with the bad guys. Okay. But I don't know, man. There's something about that movie that resonates with me. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was an epic market update. Multiple days to be prepared. Patreon, YouTube member area. Friends, it's time to come home. Up or down, it's time to come home. Opportunity is knocking. Opportunity is knocking. We will see you soon.